Have you ever felt a connection with someone you absolutely shouldn't? Someone who is completely off limits, maybe even a little dangerous? This is the story of a weekend in the woods that was supposed to be just a simple camping trip with my dad and his friends, but it turned into something far more complicated, far more intense, and something I never saw coming. Get ready for a story about unexpected desires, hidden glances, and a secret that bloomed under the shadows of the forest. This is my story. A fog-laden morning in the woods dissolved the boundaries between us, stirring something silent yet undeniable. They say the best moments happen when you least expect them. But I wasn't looking for anything extraordinary, just a simple weekend, a break from routine camping with my dad and his old friend from the force. He promised it'd be fun, a chance to relax and breathe, assuring me I'd enjoy it and to trust him, though there was a strange tension in his voice, as if he needed convincing himself. Maybe I sensed it too. This trip wouldn't be like the others. The drive felt surreal, winding through forests thick with mist, trees looming like silent giants on either side of the road. My dad's friends filled the car with laughter, sharing old stories and ribbing each other like it was a tradition. Even though I'd met them a few times before, I didn't feel entirely comfortable. Keeping to myself and watching the scenery blur by, the excitement of the trip tempered by a nagging feeling I couldn't shake. We arrived at the campsite just before dusk with the sky already streaked in purples and oranges, casting a strange glow over the landscape. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. My dad and his friends immediately got to work unloading gear and setting up tents as they bantered back and forth. I tried to join in, but I couldn't help noticing how one of them, Officer Davis, kept glancing my way. It wasn't obvious, but his gaze lingered a bit longer than felt comfortable. I brushed it off, thinking maybe I was just being paranoid. After all, he was my dad's friend, practically family. Still, a strange tension hung in the air as night fell, thickening like the fog that began to roll in from the forest. After we set up camp, we gathered around the fire, the flames casting shadows on everyone's faces as they laughed and talked. Officer Davis's glances grew bolder. I started feeling a little exposed even in the warmth of the firelight. I shifted, adjusting my seat, trying to focus on my dad's stories and drown out the uncomfortable feeling creeping over me. The conversation turned to their old days on the force, each story growing wilder than the last. Officer Jones, the youngest of my dad's friends, nudged me and asked if I'd ever thought about joining. I chuckled, shaking my head, replying it wasn't exactly my style, hoping to deflect the attention, but he wouldn't drop it, going on about how it runs in the family and how I could make a name for myself. It was harmless enough, yet his insistence felt strangely personal, as if he saw something in me that I hadn't even considered. Officer Davis, though, stayed silent, watching me with an intensity that unsettled me. I tried to ignore him, focusing on my dad's laughter and the comforting crackle of the fire, but it was no use. Every time I looked away, I could feel his eyes on me, piercing through the smoke and shadows. And just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, my dad announced it was time to turn in. I was relieved to finally escape to my tent, away from the strange vibe around the fire. The night was still and quiet, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. I zipped myself into my sleeping bag, pulling it close around me, trying to relax, but my mind wouldn't settle, replaying the strange tension, the glances, the feeling of being watched. I told myself it was just nerves, just the unfamiliarity of being out here with these men I barely knew. But then in the silence, I heard footsteps outside my tent. My pulse quickened, and I held my breath listening. The footsteps were slow, measured, like someone was trying not to make sound. I lay still, heart pounding, wondering who it could be. Maybe it was my dad checking to make sure I was settled. I wanted to call out to break the tension, but something held me back, a feeling that if I made a sound, it would only make things worse. The footsteps stopped right outside my tent. I stared at the fabric wall, every muscle tensed. After a moment, the zipper started to slide down slowly, almost hesitantly. My mind raced with confusion and a growing sense of dread. I didn't know what to expect, but I knew that whoever it was, they weren't supposed to be there. I lay as still as I could, feigning sleep, hoping they'd just go away. But instead, the tent flap opened, and I felt a presence enter, hovering just inside. My eyes were squeezed shut, my breathing shallow as I waited, unsure of what would happen next. The silence stretched thick and unbearable until finally I couldn't take it anymore. I cracked one eye open, just a sliver, enough to see a shadowy figure crouched over me. It was Officer Davis. He was just watching me. His face was hard to make out in the dim light, but I could see the glint of his eyes, the way they traveled over me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I wanted to scream, to tell him to leave, but I was frozen, trapped in that moment, paralyzed by fear and confusion. Then he reached out his hand, hovering above me, as if he couldn't quite decide what to do next. The air was thick with tension, the kind that made every second feel like an eternity. I could feel his breath, shallow and quick, and I knew I had to do something, had to find a way out of this nightmare. Just as his hand started to lower, I shifted in my sleeping bag, making a small sound like I was stirring. Officer Davis froze, pulling back slightly, his hand retreating as if burned. He watched me for a moment longer, then slowly backed away, slipping out of the tent as quietly as he had come. I waited until I was sure he was gone before I allowed myself to breathe again. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I wanted to believe it was a dream, some twisted product of my imagination, but I knew better. Every fiber of my being told me it was real and that it wasn't over yet. I lay awake for hours, listening to the sounds of the forest, every crackle of a twig or rustle of leaves making me jump. I kept expecting to hear those footsteps again, to see that shadowy figure looming over me once more, but the night passed in silence, broken only by the distant call of an owl and the faint hum of the forest. When morning finally came, I felt like I hadn't slept at all. The first rays of sunlight filtered through the tent, casting a soft glow over everything. I could hear the others moving outside, laughing and chatting as if nothing had happened. I wanted to tell my dad, to confide in him about what had happened, but I didn't know how. I didn't even know if he'd believe me. But as I stepped out of the tent and caught Officer Davis's eye across the campsite, I knew one thing for sure. Something had shifted, something I couldn't ignore. His smile was the same, easy and friendly, but there was a glint in his eyes that sent a shiver down my spine. He acted as if nothing had happened, as if we were just camping out in the woods like any other weekend, but I knew the truth, and deep down I felt that this was only the beginning. The morning felt surreal, like waking up in a strange dream that didn't quite belong to me. Around the campsite, everyone was moving with the relaxed ease of a quiet weekend, as if the world were perfectly normal. But I couldn't shake the memory of last night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Officer Davis's shadowed figure hovering over me, his eyes piercing through the darkness. My stomach twisted as I tried to make sense of it. Why would he do something like that? My dad called out to me, snapping me out of my thoughts, asking if I was ready for a hike. A broad grin on his face. He and his friends were already gathering their gear, looking fresh and eager to explore. I forced a smile, nodding as I grabbed my backpack, doing my best to keep my unease buried. After all, I didn't want to ruin the trip, but every time I glanced at Officer Davis, my pulse quickened, and I felt trapped between speaking up and staying silent. The trail wound through the dense forest, the trees towering above us, casting shadows across our path. My dad and his friends laughed and talked, sharing more stories, reliving memories. I stayed close to the back of the group, hoping to put some distance between myself and Officer Davis. But it didn't take long before I noticed him lingering near me, just enough that I couldn't ignore it. He asked if I didn't get much sleep last night, his voice low enough that the others couldn't hear. His tone was light, casual, as if we were sharing a private joke, but I felt the hidden edge to his words, a reminder of what had happened. I tensed, refusing to look at him, hoping he'd take the hint and back off, replying shortly no, keeping my eyes fixed on the trail ahead. I wanted to push past him, to disappear into the trees. But his presence was constant, unshakable. Officer Davis chuckled softly, his gaze sliding over me with an intensity that made me want to shrink away. He said the forest could be a little unsettling at night, his voice barely more than a murmur, mentioning so many strange sounds, shadows moving where they shouldn't be, and how you never really know what's out there. A shiver crept down my spine, and I quickened my pace, putting more distance between us, but Officer Davis didn't seem fazed. He kept up easily, his calmness only adding to my unease. He had a way of blending into the background, of making himself almost invisible to everyone else. But every now and then I'd catch him watching me with that same intense focus. The hike stretched on for hours, blurring as we climbed up rocky trails and navigated dense underbrush. My legs burned, but I was grateful for the physical effort, something to distract me from the tension that simmered beneath the surface. I kept my head down, focusing on each step, on the rhythm of my breathing, on anything that wasn't Officer Davis. But as we neared the summit, he fell in a step beside me again, his presence unnervingly close. The others were ahead of us, out of earshot, and Officer Davis seized the opportunity, his voice dropping to a whisper. He mentioned he noticed I didn't say anything to my dad this morning, not a word about last night. The accusation in his tone was impossible to ignore. I felt my cheeks flush, a mixture of anger and embarrassment surging through me, muttering that I didn't think it was worth mentioning, trying to keep my voice steady. But the truth was I hadn't said anything because I didn't know how to explain it. It felt like a nightmare that was somehow bleeding into my waking life. Officer Davis chuckled, a low sound that set my nerves on edge, calling it a smart choice, his eyes flicking over me with a strange satisfaction, saying it's good to know I can keep a secret. He reached out his hand, brushing against my shoulder in what might have seemed like a friendly gesture to anyone else. But to me, it was a reminder, a silent threat wrapped in a friendly facade. I pulled away, hurrying to catch up with the others, leaving Officer Davis behind me, but his words lingered, settling like a weight in my chest. The rest of the hike passed in a blur, his gaze haunting me at every turn, until we finally returned to the campsite. I felt drained, my mind racing with questions and doubts. I wanted to escape, to tell myself that it was all just in my head, but I knew better. Something had changed between us, something I couldn't ignore. As night fell, the tension grew thicker. Everyone gathered around the fire again, the flames casting long shadows across the clearing. The others laughed and chatted, oblivious to the tension simmering between Officer Davis and me. I avoided his gaze, focusing on the fire, on the sound of my dad's laughter, trying to find a sliver of normalcy. But then Officer Davis started talking, his voice soft and deliberate as he told a story about one of their cases from years ago. His tone was light, conversational, but I felt his words directed at me, as if he were speaking in a code only I could understand. He described how they had worked together, covering for each other, keeping each other's secrets, saying that what real trust is. Glancing at me, a hint of a smile playing at his lips, knowing someone has your back no matter what. I forced a tight smile, nodding along, but inside I felt like I was on the edge of a cliff. The message was clear, veiled behind his story. He expected my silence, my complicity, and worse, he seemed to enjoy the tension, like it was a game only he knew the rules to. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I got up, muttering an excuse about needing some air, and slipped away from the campfire, heading down a narrow trail that led deeper into the forest. The cool night air washed over me, calming my nerves, and for a moment I felt like I could breathe again. I leaned against a tree, closing my eyes, letting the silence of the forest settle around me. But then I heard footsteps behind me. I turned, heart pounding, and saw Officer Davis standing there, his silhouette outlined against the faint glow of the campfire. His expression was unreadable, a mix of amusement and something darker. He took a step closer, his gaze steady, unwavering, saying that I know I'm a lot more interesting than he thought, his voice barely above a whisper, mentioning most people would have run by now, but not me. There was a challenge in his tone, a dare I didn't understand. I took a step back, my pulse racing, but he didn't seem fazed. He moved closer, closing the distance between us until I could feel the warmth of his breath. My mind was screaming at me to move, to run, but I couldn't. His gaze held me captive, rooted to the spot. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a murmur, saying that secrets can be powerful things. They can bind people together or tear them apart. His hand brushed my arm, light as a feather. But the touch sent a shock through me. It felt like a line being crossed, a boundary slipping away into the night. I wanted to tell him to stop, to push him away, but the words stuck in my throat. I felt trapped, caught in a web. I didn't know how to escape, and the worst part was a part of me didn't want to. There was a strange thrill in his attention, a feeling that defied logic, something I couldn't quite explain. Officer Davis pulled back slightly, watching me with a smirk that made my skin prickle, whispering goodnight, his voice laced with a promise, a hint of something that left me breathless. And then he turned, disappearing back down the trail, leaving me alone in the darkness. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, my mind racing, my heart pounding. I wanted to believe it was all some twisted game, a misunderstanding, but I knew better. This was real, and whatever was happening between us was only growing stronger, pulling me into something I didn't fully understand. When I finally returned to camp, Officer Davis was sitting by the fire, laughing with the others as if nothing had happened. He glanced up as I approached, his gaze lingering just long enough to make my pulse quicken. I forced myself to sit down, to join in the conversation, but my thoughts were a tangled mess, and I felt like I was walking on a tightrope, one misstep away from falling. As the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was trapped in a story with no clear end, a path I hadn't chosen but couldn't escape. I knew I should pull back, put distance between us, but a part of me was drawn to the thrill, the danger of the unknown. I couldn't deny it any longer. Something had started between us, something dark and dangerous, and I wasn't sure I wanted it to stop. The night settled around the camp in a heavy silence, the fire reduced to soft embers. The others had gone to their tents, leaving me alone with my thoughts, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every crackle, every shift in the trees felt magnified, and I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see Officer Davis's shadow lurking just out of sight. The forest was pitch black, the only light coming from the dim glow of the dying fire. I told myself to get some rest, to put distance between me and whatever strange pull had started to form between us. But even as I lay in my tent, I could feel the tension building, the anticipation that left me restless. I couldn't ignore any longer. This wasn't just unease, it was something else, something that tugged at me in a way I didn't fully understand. After what felt like an eternity of tossing and turning, I heard footsteps, soft, barely audible, but unmistakable. They stopped just outside my tent, and for a moment I held my breath, my heart pounding in my chest. The zipper slid down, slow and steady, and I felt my pulse quicken, a mix of dread and anticipation making it hard to breathe. Officer Davis stepped into the tent, his silhouette just barely visible in the faint moonlight filtering through the fabric. He didn't speak, didn't ask if he could come in. He simply moved forward, closing the gap between us until he was kneeling beside me, his presence filling the small space. I wanted to ask what he was doing, to tell him to leave, but the words wouldn't come. He reached out his hand, brushing my shoulder lightly, his touch warm against my skin. The contact was brief, tentative, as if he was testing my reaction. I didn't move, barely even breathed, waiting to see what he'd do next. His hand slid down my arm, a slow, deliberate movement that sent a shiver through me. I felt like I was on the edge of a cliff, teetering between the urge to pull away and the inexplicable need to stay close. Without a word, Officer Davis leaned in, his face inches from mine. I could feel his breath warm and steady as he watched me, his gaze searching, intense. There was a pause, a moment that seemed to stretch on forever, filled with the weight of everything unspoken between us. Then slowly he closed the distance, his lips brushing mine in the faintest of kisses. It was gentle at first, almost hesitant, like he was waiting for me to push him away. But I didn't. Instead, I found myself leaning into it, my own breath catching as the kiss deepened, growing bolder, more certain. His hand moved to the back of my neck, fingers threading through my hair as he pulled me closer, his touch sending sparks through me. I could feel the roughness of his stubble against my skin, the warmth of his body pressing against mine, and it felt like everything I'd been trying to deny, everything I tried to keep buried was spilling over, impossible to contain. I knew this was dangerous, that I was crossing a line I couldn't uncross. But in that moment, I didn't care. All that mattered was the feeling of his lips on mine, the way his hand moved down my back, pulling me closer until there was no space left between us. Our breaths mingled, our movements slow and unhurried, as if we had all the time in the world. The tension that had been building between us, the unspoken pull that had kept me up at night, finally broke free, and I felt myself surrendering to it, giving in to the closeness that had been lingering just beneath the surface. His hand traced the line of my jaw, his touch light, almost reverent, as if he were memorizing the feel of me. And I found myself mirroring his movements, my own hands reaching out, tentative at first, then bolder as I felt him respond. Officer Davis's kiss deepened, his lips moving with a quiet intensity that made my heart race, and I felt like I was drowning, lost in a sensation that defied explanation. Every touch, every brush of his fingers felt electric, like he was unlocking something inside me I hadn't even known was there. I didn't want to think, didn't want to question it. I just wanted to lose myself in the moment, to let go of everything but the warmth of his touch and the way he looked at me, like I was the only thing that mattered. We broke apart for a brief moment, both of us breathless, his gaze searching mine as if looking for some kind of reassurance. I didn't know what he saw, but he seemed to find what he was looking for because his hand moved back up to my face, cupping my cheek as he leaned in again, his lips meeting mine with a newfound urgency. The kiss was deeper this time, more intense, and I felt myself responding, matching his movements with a need I couldn't ignore. But there was more, something unspoken that hung between us, a weight that neither of us acknowledged, but both of us felt. It was the understanding that this was dangerous, that whatever was happening here would change everything. And yet in that moment, I couldn't bring myself to care. I didn't want to think about the consequences, about what this would mean tomorrow or the next day. All I wanted was to be close to him, to feel the weight of his hands on my skin grounding me in the present, pushing everything else away. As we slowly parted, our breaths intertwined, creating a symphony of intimacy. Officer Davis's forehead lingered against mine, our gazes deeply connected. The silence enveloped us, heavy with unspoken emotions and unresolved tensions, yet it felt strangely comforting, like a warm embrace. In that suspended moment, our hearts beat as one, our bodies swaying together in perfect harmony. The world around us melted away, leaving only the two of us, lost in the depths of each other's eyes. I couldn't predict what the future held, but I knew I couldn't resist the pull between us. Our connection had become unstoppable, a force beyond our control. Officer Davis pulled away slightly, his hand still lingering on my face, his gaze steady, unwavering. There was a question in his eyes, an unspoken, "Are you okay?" that I didn't know how to answer. Instead, I nodded, a small, almost imperceptible movement, but it seemed to be enough. He gave a faint smile, the kind that didn't reach his eyes, but I could feel the tension easing, the worry that had been etched into his features softening, even if just a little. He didn't say anything as he stood up, slipping out of the tent with the same quietness he'd come in. I watched him go, a strange mix of relief and longing settling over me. Part of me wanted him to stay, to keep that closeness, but another part of me knew that it was better this way, that any more would be too much too soon. I lay back, staring up at the ceiling of the tent, my mind racing with everything that had just happened, the memory of his touch. The feel of his lips on mine lingered, a warmth that refused to fade. I tried to make sense of it, to understand what it meant, but the more I thought about it, the less clear it became. All I knew was that something had shifted, something that couldn't be undone, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for what came next. As I lay there listening to the sounds of the forest, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. mingling with the confusion and uncertainty. I didn't have all the answers, didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, I didn't feel the need to figure it all out. I could just be here in this moment with the lingering memory of his kiss and the feeling of his hand on my skin. The night stretched on, and I drifted in and out of sleep, my mind caught between dreams and reality, between the warmth of his touch and the cold clarity of morning. I knew that things would be different now, that whatever had happened between us would leave a mark, but I also knew that I wasn't ready to let it go. Not yet. As dawn approached, I lay there, a strange sense of anticipation building, the feeling that this was only the beginning of something I couldn't yet understand. I didn't know what the day would bring, didn't know where this would lead, but for the first time I felt a sense of purpose, a feeling that maybe, just maybe, this was exactly where I was supposed to be. When dawn broke, a thin mist hung over the camp, weaving through the trees and casting an eerie glow on everything it touched. I lay in my tent, staring up at the fabric above, feeling the weight of the night still pressing down on me. The memory of Officer Davis's touch lingered, a warmth that felt as if it had settled beneath my skin, refusing to fade. Part of me wondered if it was even real, if I had imagined it all in the silence of the night. But deep down I knew the truth. Whatever had passed between us had crossed a line, and there was no going back. The camp came alive with sounds of breakfast preparations, voices filtering through the morning air as if nothing had changed. My dad was already up, laughing with Officer Jones about something I couldn't hear, and the normalcy of it all was almost unsettling. I knew I had to face Officer Davis again, to navigate whatever this new tension between us meant, but the thought made my stomach twist. When I finally emerged from my tent, Officer Davis was leaning against a tree, sipping his coffee as he watched me approach. Our eyes met for a brief moment, and in that glance, I saw a flicker of the closeness we had shared, the unspoken connection that now lay between us like an invisible thread. He gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod, as if acknowledging everything without saying a word, and then looked away, his expression unreadable. Breakfast was quiet, the usual laughter and jokes muted. I kept my gaze low, picking at my food, feeling Officer Davis's presence across from me, even without looking. Each casual comment from my dad or his friends felt surreal, as if we were all performing a part, going through the motions of normalcy while I struggled to keep my emotions in check. The urge to pull Officer Davis aside, to talk about what had happened pulsed within me, but I knew this wasn't the time or place. The day unfolded slowly, each hour feeling heavier than the last. We spent most of it exploring a nearby river, a favorite spot my dad had discovered on one of his old camping trips. The others waded through the shallow water, laughing and splashing each other. But I stayed back, finding a quiet spot on the riverbank. The cool water rushed over the rocks, its steady rhythm calming, grounding me in a way I desperately needed. I sensed Officer Davis approach before I saw him. He sat down beside me, keeping a respectful distance, the silence between us thick with unspoken words. For a long time, we just sat there, listening to the water, letting the tension ebb and flow like the current. I knew he was waiting, giving me the chance to speak first, but I couldn't find the right words. Didn't know how to express the mix of emotions swirling inside me. Finally, he broke the silence, his voice low and careful, saying he never meant to make things difficult for me. His words hung in the air, each one landing heavily, and I turned to look at him, searching his face for some hint of what he was feeling. There was a softness in his gaze, a vulnerability I hadn't seen before, and it made my heart ache in a way I couldn't quite explain. I replied, my voice barely more than a whisper, that I don't even know what difficult means anymore. That everything feels complicated now, and I could feel the weight of my own uncertainty pressing down on me. The fear of what this would mean for us, for everything. He nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful, as if he were trying to untangle his own emotions, saying that I don't have to have it all figured out. That sometimes things just happen and we deal with them as best we can, his hand reaching out to rest on the rock between us. His words brought a strange comfort, a sense of understanding that eased some of the tension in my chest. I glanced down at his hand, resting so close to mine, and for a moment I felt a surge of something I couldn't name. An urge to bridge that small gap, to reach out and let him know that somehow I understood too. But before I could act, voices echoed down the riverbank. My dad and the others calling out that it was time to head back. Officer Davis pulled his hand away, giving me one last look, a silent reassurance, before we joined the others. As we walked back to camp, I felt a strange sense of clarity settling over me, a realization that whatever this was between us, it was real and it was ours to navigate, however messy it might be. Back at camp, we packed up in silence, everyone moving with the efficient ease that comes from years of practice. Officer Davis and I exchanged only brief glances, our conversation by the river lingering in my mind like a promise, a reminder that we didn't have to rush anything, that we could take this one step at a time. There was something comforting in that thought, a reassurance that made the uncertainty a little easier to bear. As we loaded up the car, I took one last look at the campsite, the place where everything had changed. It felt surreal standing there with the same people, the same scenery, yet knowing that nothing would ever be quite the same again. I climbed into the back seat, the familiar ache of parting settling over me, mixed with the thrill of what might come next. The drive back was quiet, everyone too tired to talk, lost in their own thoughts. I rested my head against the window, watching the forest blur by, feeling a strange mixture of calm and anticipation. Officer Davis sat in the front, his silhouette outlined by the sunlight filtering through the trees, and I felt a faint smile tug at the corners of my mouth. There was something between us now, something that went beyond words, and I knew that it would be waiting for us even after we returned to the routine of everyday life. When we finally pulled up to my house, I got out, stretching my legs and feeling the weight of the trip settle over me. My dad gave me a quick hug, clapping me on the shoulder, and I saw Officer Davis watching from the corner of his eye, his expression carefully neutral. As I turned to go, he caught my gaze just for a moment, a fleeting glance that held everything we had said, a silent promise that this wasn't the end. I walked up the path to my front door, feeling a strange sense of peace wash over me, a quiet certainty that things would unfold as they were meant to. I didn't know what the future held, didn't have all the answers, but for the first time I felt okay with that. Whatever this was, this connection, this spark, it was real, and I was ready to face it one day at a time. Wow, that camping trip changed everything, didn't it? If you felt the emotions in this story, please give this video a like and subscribe to LGBT Stories for more heart-wrenching and romantic tales just like this one. Let me know in the comments what you thought about this unexpected forest encounter. Have you ever experienced something similar? Share your thoughts below. Thanks for watching.